Listen up, Hellspawn. Before you all leave for the day, I have one final announcement. Aizawa huffed and set aside their final quiz papers, shuffling the pages into a neat stack before plopping them down with the rest of his files for the day to the left of his table. Izuku was observant, as most previously quirkless kids were. He knew how to tell when a teacher was hiding something from the class. Now, Aizawa was good at hiding things, like insanely good at hiding things. He was an underground hero capable of espionage and combat, and was good enough to balance out his highly demanding night job with his daily job of teaching highly demanding students. He'd been working in the line of fire for 12 years and had spent 3 of them balancing out teaching with heroics, so the man had a large amount of experience in keeping information to himself. Luckily for him, however, Izuku also had approximately 13 years worth of experience in drawing out analysis from even the most meager amounts of information. At the beginning of the day, Eraserhead had woken up and immediately began to take roll. Immediately, red flags appeared in Izuku's mind. Every day of the class always began with a judgment on how many seconds it took them to get quiet. Every single day. Sometimes the class would be just too loud to hear him, but nonetheless, Aizawa would always find a way to bring it up. Except for today. From there on, it was easy to see just how their teacher was hiding something. The slight pauses whenever he finished a sentence as if waiting to bring something up, the longer periods of sleeping in class, or perhaps just thinking rather than a regular nap. While there wasn't any possible way for him to tell, being seated towards the middle of the class and not possessing any hearing augmentative quirk such as Jiro or Shoji, he would probably bet on Aizawa not actually having the general heart rate or breathing speed of someone asleep. And now that he knew for certain that something was off, it was easy to see it with other teachers as well. Ectoplasm Sensei was a man of few words, but even today the man hadn't asked a single question during math, instead giving them page items to do in their workbook while occupied in a text file of his own. English, with Max Sensei, carried on differently, however, as the man himself was simply more excited than average and thus asked more questions. When he himself had been called upon and proceeded to stutter out a random answer to whatever questions had been produced. Midnight had just been straight up missing from their classroom. Ectoplasm once again had produced a clone of himself to stay watching over them as they completed a minor test on different aspects of hero costume design. Or perhaps that had in itself been the real ectoplasm? Maybe ectoplasm never truly showed up to classes and instead just used a series of clones to appear as if he were at school while at the same time completing hero work during school hours. Was there a fourth sensei clone out there directing the other 3 during their tasks? All the clones are still one person and connected by a hive mind of sorts, so did that mean there was always one main ectoplasm who stood behind the scenes and relayed orders to the other clones? Zero softly nudging his elbow brought Izuku back to attention. A few flickering gazes fixated on him, making him realize he must have been muttering aloud. Face turning bright red, Izuku mumbled out an apology, causing Sarah to grin at him and give a quick thumbs up before turning back to Aizawa. Turning to face their teacher himself, blushing and still strongly fixated on his features, Izuku brought himself back to reality to listen to what was about to be said. Rubbing the space between his eyes, Aizawa began. So, while we haven't run it for the past however many years, Nedzu had made the decision to bring back an old UA tradition. Instantly, Izuku's mind went through what possible traditions could be referred to as Uraraka raised her hand and began to speak excitedly. So, is it a tradition like the sports festival was, or do you mean more along the lines of saying Itakadimasu before we eat? Uraraka bounced a bit, causing their teacher to rub in between his eyes once more before answering. More of a sports festival thing. He paused and let out a sigh. But next time, actually wait for me to call on you to answer, rather than just talking the moment you put your hand up. Yes, sir! Saluting in agreement, the girl sat back down with a wide smile. Ida chopped his hand, as he no doubt reprimanded her for speaking out of turn, despite how he was technically doing the same thing. It was times like these that Izuku wished his seat was closer to where his friends were, rather than straight behind Bakugo and in front of Mineta. Scrunching his face up slightly in thought, Izuku broke out of it the moment Aizawa began to speak again. About 4 years back, there was an incident wherein the UA student files were released into the public. Izuku remembered that scandal, remembered how a former staff member had sold students' personal information out for extra money, which had then led to the critical injury of 2 third-year students and 1 first-year by villains who had targeted weak points in their quirks. Izuku remembers how the hero had their license stripped in the largest court case he'd ever seen published online before, how that hero had been scrubbed from all databases, left jailed and banned from ever possessing a quirk license again. And what you students may not perhaps know is that the former hero Nightlight actually stole the students' physical files during the UA Gala, an event we are bringing back in 3 weeks' time where we, as the teachers of UA, will be inviting a large guest list of high-ranked pro heroes for the largest display of Japanese hero culture the world has ever seen. Izuku let out a wide-eyed shriek as Midnight burst through the doors with a bang slightly reminiscent of when she had come in to help with their hero names, but instead with far more enthusiasm. Koda also let out a yelp, his paper falling to the floor, which set off a chain reaction of Tokiomi releasing Dark Shadow with a squawk, who flew out to hit Kaminari in the back of his head, Jiro choking on her own laughter as the boy let out a burst of electricity in fright which coincidentally hit Mina next to him. The two of them then convulsed for a few short seconds before finally falling still. A slight strain of drool formed at Kaminari's mouth. For a moment, blessed with silence, perpetrated the room as students half from the shock of it all, and just out of relief it wasn't a villain attack for once. Aizawa's eyes were shrouded in darkness as Midnight sweat dropped. One hand rose to the back of her neck as she let out a grimacing smile at the chaos she caused. Geez, I didn't mean to burst in too loudly. A soft "you think" came from what suspiciously was Aizawa's direction, but Midnight was quick to fall back into good cheer again. But Izuku still felt himself reeling from the knowledge that UA was going to be having its formerly annual gala again. Midnight cracked her whip against her hand, causing Mineta behind him to make a strange gasping noise. He didn't nod want to think much about. For those naughty students who may not know about the UA Gala, someone muttered something along the lines as if it used to be one of the most acclaimed celebrations in Japan, with all sorts of heroes attending, namely the top 10 at any time, as well as many high rankers from other countries such as America or China. The gala in itself is a black tie event where we at UA show off our greatest military possessions and other historical assets of Japan. Students now began to sit forwards in their seats, a faint popping came from Bakugo, and quiet whispering began to start, but Izuku felt his eyes hook onto Midnight. One of the most, if not the largest, gatherings of famously powerful heroes, probably an even bigger expo than what was held on Island, if not only because most of the more powerful members of Japan would attend. Not even just heroes themselves, despite that being what the gala was focused on, but also almost every high-level worker of the Hero Commission coming around to broker peace with Nedzu by showing off their country's rich culture. And the sheer amount of quirks that would be around, Izuku had to stop himself quickly before he began salivating at the thought of so many quirks to analyze. But why would they be bringing this up to them in class? Midnight must be drowning in work as the teacher of modern hero art history, thus probably being one of the coordinators of the event along with the principal. So why would she bring it up to them in class if it weren't for... As you students must know by now, the gala is only to be attended by invitation only. No invitations can be just brought online due to the highly sensitive amount of riches we show off. Being cut off from his train of thoughts, Izuku zoned in once again to wait in anticipation as Midnight only grew more enthusiastic at the idea of historical items on display. However, there is another part to the whole invitation-only aspect, one that we generally don't release to the public, and we'll be having you sign a non-disclosure agreement later in the day. The classroom began to chitter about what the NDA could be for, but he had a slight suspicion. Izuku's hands fell weak as Midnight's grin practically took over her full face as she snapped her whip and gave out a pose. All UA students have a special invite to the gala. And the class utterly erupted. Kaminari and Mina hugged each other, and even Todoroki looked slightly surprised. Uraraka was floating in the air, and Izuku couldn't wait to go and finally get to see what sorts of quirks were on display and what heroes would be around there anyways. Would their teachers all be going? Would All Might be there, even in his weakened form? Endeavor never missed a chance at a ball or celebration run even slightly by the Hero Commission, so did that mean he'd be there as well? Poor Todoroki, if so. But which American heroes would be there? It would probably be just like Island Expo, but even more selective and high class. Oh, but that's not all. While you hero students get a free pass no matter what, we'd also like to offer you a full-time position as security of the event due to the prices of all the artifacts we have on display. Uraraka practically drooled in her seat at the thought of how much the items could go for. We'd like to encourage all of you to take these jobs as well. If possible, the classroom was even more alert now, and Aizawa took over from where Midnight had left off. Security will be getting some real behind-the-scenes experiences of the event itself, as well as the fact This will give you experience for the more stationary side of heroics, protecting a targeted area, as well as that all students who do succeed in security will not have to do their practicals for the next final exams. You will be graded, however, so don't think just attending is an automatic pass. And that was exactly what a room full of teenagers wanted to hear. The yelling got even louder, and soon enough it was a struggle to hear their teacher handing out the resource packets on their responsibilities if they take up the role or not. Izuku couldn't help but gaze down at his own packet. His mind was shockingly quiet for once. Before he knew it, class was let out, a happy buzz going through all his classmates as they remark upon what they would be wearing or whether or not they'd be taking up this job as security. I mean, I need this, don't you think? I don't think I'd be able to do another round of those remedial lessons Aizawa gave us at the camp. Kaminari, you guys barely even got one night of those lessons. How could you be so afraid of it happening again when you didn't even need to do the work last time? Man, just one lesson we did was hard enough for me. I think I'd honestly just rather have another villain attack rather than go through that whole thing again. Deku-kun, aren't you also just so excited about this thing? Yuraka bounced over to him with Ida in tow. The other floundered around as he was dragged across the classroom. Izuku blushed slightly, mind still stuck on the idea of how many heroes there would be to talk to. I just can't even imagine all those heroes who would be there. Oh, do you think Godzilla would be there? He was at the Island Expo after all, so I would assume he attends Japanese parties even after moving to America. Oh, unless I'm just assuming and the expo was just a coincidence, but even then still. Midoriya! Ida startled him out of his mumbling with fright and pushed up his glasses, hand chopping beside him while their female friend stifled her own laughter. While it is admirable to have such appreciations for heroics, I simply must stop you at once before you go off on another mumbling stream again. Uraraka couldn't hold it in anymore and began laughing. One hand quite literally slapped her knee in display of over-the-top dramatism as Ida's hands continued to chop. What was with his friends and really exaggerated movement? Izuku murmured an apology as his embarrassment grew even further. What was it today with him going off a tangent today? Yes, they really did make a good team. The thought made him feel warm. It was just amazing to have friends. Nice to be able to spend time with other people who actually for once liked him. But wasn't that just sad though? His first actual friend since primary school, and they were only friends with him because of one fall. If he'd never gotten a quirk, he would have remained a quirkless Deku, that worthless freak who stuttered and mumbled as he wrote in creepy notebooks when nobody was watching. But did the quirk really change anything? Anyways, Uraraka said, wiping an imaginary tear from her eye. What would you think about the whole gala thing? Ida puffed out his chest, glasses practically shining in the fluorescent lights. I think it's an amazing opportunity that we cannot simply afford to forego. The fundraising part of the event is also quite admirable in particular, and as heroes in training, I believe this event may be a great way for us to cement our positions in hero society. Oh, you make a great point, Uraraka turned to Ida. But still, You must have been to the event before, right? Like as a younger heir to the Idaten throne and all that. What was it like? A meager blush covered Ida's features as he turned away, both Uraraka and Izuku staring at him in anticipation with wide eyes. I, I must admit, I haven't exactly been to the gala before. Uraraka let out an exaggerated gasp, hand flying to her mouth. They never invited you? But Idaten is so large and famous. Typically, only fully registered heroes and other government officials are invited. Izuku turned to the newcomer, a smile beginning to beam out from over his face. Todoroki-kun, so even the families don't get invited at all? Uraraka gasped once again. Ida next to her looking slightly put off that Todoroki had even joined the conversation in the first place. So, do you mean to say that even you haven't gone? Like as the son of the number one pro hero? Todoroki shrugged, a slight flinch rolling off his shoulders as his father was mentioned before the flinch was gone, as if nothing were there. Even if I were All Might's son, I wouldn't have been allowed to attend. As it is a celebration of heroes, the security measures are fierce, and even if Endeavor had done everything he could to sneak me in, I doubt I would have gotten near the doors. So security was that harsh? How would they be adjusting it because of the leak? Maybe there were sensors for body heat and motion so people like Hagakure couldn't sneak past, or that a quirk was in constant use to see the number of people in one area at a time so even that Mr. Compressed Sky quirk wouldn't be able to hide any license. They'd have to have security screening for people who aren't who they'd say they are, like Himiko Toga and any other shapeshifters. But even then, did that mean it was a system fully developed on quirks? As his friends continued to speak, Izuku continued to zone down. His mind moved a mile per minute as he automatically listed put down potential hero candidates who would be attending, whether or not the majority would be from Japan. The only reason for the continuation of the gala was to gain a reputation for the schools after they failed to protect students from multiple villain attacks. None of them realized the shadowy figure that was steadily growing closer and closer until, "What the hell are the four of you still doing in my classroom? Go back to the dorms and talk there so I can sleep." Uraraka jumped as Aizawa appeared behind her, Izuku jerking back to reality alongside her as Ida instantly began to heat up at the embarrassment of taking up the precious time of a teacher. But before the other could even utter one word of apology, Aizawa raised his hand to cut them all off. His face looked unbelievably tired for one moment as their teacher seemingly regretted all of his life choices. "Just leave my classroom, and quietly, please." Just as the four of them began to exit, all three of them humbled except for Todoroki because seriously, this guy never gets embarrassed. They stopped once again. "Wait, problem child. Hang back for a moment. I have a job for you." Oh, he was stopped. Signaling for the others to carry on ahead of him, Izuku was suddenly very conscious of the fact that he was now alone in the classroom with his sensei. Had he done something wrong? Uraraka exited last with one final salute, shut the door behind her. Now it was just him, the sounds of a normally obnoxiously loud room, and his very menacing teacher. "I'm not that scary, problem child." Izuku let out a yelp, covering his mouth, as his eyes flew wide in embarrassment while his teacher merely snorted. You didn't remember anything. I could just tell what you were thinking from the way you looked. You really need to get started on fixing the whole open book thing you have going on, Midoriya, or else one day a villain may start to get ideas. He shuffled around his feet in silence as Aizawa sat back down at his desk. His signature yellow sleeping bag slowly rose to cover his figure like the world's most hellish cocoon. After a few more seconds of silence, he snapped. You wanted to talk to me, Aizawa-sensei? That stammering also must have gotten on his teacher's nerves. He was just so useless. Not me. I said I have a job for you, and I do. Rubbing between his eyes once again. Was it because of persistent pain due to his quirk? His teacher once again began to speak. Nedzu told me to tell whoever the last person in the classroom was to go to his office for a quick talk. That if there were a group of people, then go by the person ranked last in the class seating order. Knowing that the rat bastard though, he's already intentionally calculated that it was going to be you and wants to talk to you about a mistake on your file or something in private. Just head up to the teacher's lounge and go 3 doors down if you don't know where it is. By now the sleeping bag had risen over his features to surround his face. Izuku is in the odd situation of looking as if he were in conversation with a giant mutated worm. Anyways, he told me to get whoever the student was to bring him up some papers I have in my desk drawer, so I'll hand them to you and then I want you to get out of my classroom so I can sleep. Got it? Izuku nodded furiously and fumbled as his teachers handed him an entire briefcase full of papers. The weight of the item being oddly heavy for such a small bag. And Izuku was on his way, shutting the classroom door behind him, but not before Aizawa could pull the cord of his bag to fully cover his face, except for a small hole to breathe out of, and then flopped onto the floor.